If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. People, what is the strangest/weirdest thing you've witnessed that you just can't explain to this day? I once let my cat outside to go do cat stuff or whatever, then I walked up the stairs and saw my cat sitting on the stairs. I was confused and gave her a pet to make sure she was real. I then walked around to the back door, let my cat in again, and never saw the doppelganger again. I have no clue what crazy shit happened there, so I just go about my days and pretend it never happened. My wife and I drove out into the countryside to stargaze. We were parked, lying in the back of my truck, with Led Zeppelin playing in the cab. Stairway to Heaven came on, and I checked the time. It was 9 p.m. Near the guitar solo, the wind picked up and it got really cold, so when the song finished, we hopped back in the truck to go. The song finished, and as we started driving again, we checked the time, and it was 3 a.m. Somehow we lost 6 hours listening to a 7-minute song. My grandmother had this old painting in the back bedroom that used to freak all of us grandkids out. It was like this grayscale ocean scene filled with these rowboats, and in the boats were these weird animal-shaped shadows that were terrifying. It was so bad that she had to take it down because none of us would sleep in there without an adult. Anyway, we're at some family gathering years later, and I'm talking with my cousins, and the painting comes up. So we ask the parents and my grandma if they remember the creepy painting. They do, and we all exclaim about how creepy the shadow figures in the boats were, and why would you ever buy a painting like that? Parents and grandma all look at each other, confused. And my grandma slowly says, the boats were empty. Ugh. It still creeps me out. When I was about 7 or 8, I was playing on the swing set with my dog, Oscar, running around me. It was early spring, and I was facing the wood line, where the blackberry bushes were thickest. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a voice says, "Hi, Oscar." Distinctly male, kind of high-pitched and tinny, and coming from the woods. It wasn't delivered in the usual saying hi to a dog voice, more like the tone you'd use if you were reading ingredients off a soup can label. It also bears mentioning that my parents live in the middle of nowhere. I stopped the swing, ran into the house with the dog, and locked the door. My parents didn't believe me and still don't to this day, but I've never been able to shake off my fear of the woods. My brother and I were hiking, we lost track of time, and it got dark. We managed to get near a point where our father could pick us up. While we were waiting, we separated a bit, and I heard a rock breaking. I assumed it was my brother, but he asked me, "What are you doing, bro?" In that moment, we realized that someone or something was around. We ran to a rocky wall, climbing it like a pair of monkeys being hunted by a beast. We didn't see anything, and we didn't hear anything more, but we stood still at the top of the rocks until our father came. When he arrived in the car, we asked him to point the lights to the woods. We saw a fresh, green branch, about an arm's width, broken. There are no animals in our country that can break a branch like that. Besides, we heard nothing but the branch breaking. There was no wind, and the branches were green and healthy. We still have no explanation for that. We have told the story to many people, and no one has won either. I saw something at the park late at night that still bothers me 7 years later. I was with a few friends at my city's downtown park, waiting for our other friend to get off work. She worked late, like until 2 in the morning, so it would have been around 1 a.m. when this happened. There was a pond in the middle of the park and a wood bridge over it. So out of nowhere, we hear this woman shouting at the top of her lungs from around that area. I have no clue why we decided to check it out, but we walked over and saw 3 people standing on the bridge, 2 absolutely enormous men that looked like bodybuilders and an older woman screaming at something on the floor of the bridge. The guys were posted like bouncers at a seedy nightclub, and the woman was holding a book over her head. We weren't that close, but I could tell she was not speaking English. Then we saw what she was screaming at, a little boy tied to the side of the bridge, slumped over like he was unconscious. While we were trying to figure out what the duck we were looking at, one of the giant men turned and looked right at us. Obviously, we ran the duck away right that goddamn minute. We got in the car and called the cops, but we were freaked out pretty much all night. My cousins and I often stargaze at my grandparents' property. The night sky is so clear there that we see satellites all the time. One night I thought I spotted one, but I noticed something very odd about it. It was moving much faster and in a more linear direction than usual. I decided it must be some sort of plane, despite the fact that it looked about as small as a satellite and didn't have any secondary flashing lights like the planes we usually see. Then it started making sharp right-angle turns. I have no idea what sort of plane would follow such a random flight pattern. It would go up, forwards, down, backwards, etc. in quick succession. It also disappeared and then reappeared a minute later in a completely different part of the sky before disappearing altogether. We all saw it, but none of us have ever been able to figure out what that light was. When I was around 11 or 12, I lived in a house in the middle of a forest. My parents were pretty reclusive and wanted to live somewhere far away from other people, so they found this house and decided it was perfect. My room was upstairs, down a long hall, and to the left. Because of this, I tended to get a little nervous at night as my brother was all the way at the other end of the hall, and my parents' room was downstairs, basically as far from me as they could be in the house. I never had a feeling of unease, though, not like the stereotypical I could just feel something was wrong watching me. It seemed like a normal house. One night, though, about 10 minutes after my mom had tucked me in, I was sneakily playing Super Mario Bros. On my Game Boy. One of the perks of being so far from everyone else in the house, I didn't really need to worry about getting caught. I heard a thud sound coming from my right, where my window was. My pulse quickened a little, and I glanced over there but saw nothing. I went back to my Game Boy, now a little frightened, but not so much that I felt the need to cry out or anything. About 5 minutes later, I heard it again, but it was louder now. I started breathing heavily and walked towards the window, really hoping I wouldn't see whatever it was that my imagination had created. I looked out the window, and right at the edge of the forest, I saw what looked almost like a human figure. Almost. Its legs were bent awkwardly, and its head wasn't seated correctly on its neck. Both of its arms were abnormally long and had 3 joints instead of 1. I was pretty much paralyzed with fear. I just sat there staring at it, and it was staring at me. After about 10 seconds, it made a beckoning motion with its finger. The motion was slowed to a crawl and very awkward, like the creature was still figuring out how to use its body. I snapped out of my paralysis and screamed as loud as I could. I heard the downstairs lights being flicked on, and my dad was in my room shortly after that. I was a mess. I was lying on the floor, sobbing, and my dad asked what was wrong. I told him what I saw, and he replied by beating me savagely with his favorite pair of copper-plated jumper cables. I never did figure out what the hell that creature was, and, to be honest, I never want to. I just hope that I never have to see it again. One time at about 6 p.m. in Wilmington, Massachusetts, I was driving my FedEx truck back to the warehouse at the end of a long day. It was December, so it was quite dark out. I turned a corner, and there in the middle of the street is an old-fashioned stagecoach being pulled by 2 enormous horses, and it is stopped dead in the middle of the road. There was absolutely no way I could stop in time, so I slammed on the brakes and braced for impact, which unfortunately included closing my eyes. A truck slams to a halt. Packages fly everywhere in the back. I open my eyes expecting to see wood and horse meat everywhere, and nothing. There is nothing there. The only possible explanation is that it was Christmas time and every FedEx/UPS employee can tell you we're overworked and exhausted, but it was so real. I could see the veins in these muscular horses' faces. It freaked me right the duck out. I was out walking my dog in my front yard. As I'm on my way back to my house, I look next to it, and suddenly I see a glowing ball of light. It wasn't high in the sky, only about 25 feet above me. It was about the size of a basketball, and it was moving fast. Not so fast, as I couldn't see it, though. It traveled from the front of my house to the back, then took a sharp left turn into some trees next to my house. It was for sure not in the sky, because it went in front of my trees, then went behind some and disappeared from sight. I still have no clue to what it was. When I was like 14, I was sitting in a chair across from a screen door. We had our regular door open with the screen door closed, which is common in the South. In a weird, hyper-excited voice, my mom points outside and says, "What's that?" And it was this big, glowing white light. I was like, "That's the moon, Mom, ha ha ha." And she takes me out the front door onto the front porch, and we turn slightly to the right, and she says, "No, that's the moon." I looked at it, and it was even smaller than this huge circle of light I was seeing before. And now, the more I looked at it, the more that big light didn't look like it was in the sky, it looked like it was right behind the pine trees. It was terrifying. When I was little and got in trouble, my mom used to make me go upstairs and look out the bathroom window. There was a cow on our roof, and it really scared me. I remember being threatened with this punishment. "Do I need to take you to see the cow on the roof?" Honestly, it was terrifying, and I can still see the image of that cow looking in at me menacingly through the window. The problem is, there's no way there was a cow on our roof. Also, I have tried finding images online of a cow that looked like this one, but they don't seem to exist. The best way I can describe its coat is calico. There were big black patches of fur over each eye, kind of like how a killer whale appears to have much larger eyes than it really does due to skin color. Of course, no one in my family knows what I'm talking about now, but I vividly remember this happening on more than one occasion. My friend lived in the middle of nowhere. Her house was surrounded by fields without people or homes for miles. One night, we were sitting in her barn, and we heard footsteps running towards us. We looked outside the barn doors to see a massive blue light glowing in the dark and moving steadily towards us. We hear the footsteps and see the light, but we can't see anybody causing it. We freak out and take off, running to the other barn and locking ourselves in. For the next half hour, we could hear something circling the barn. Eventually it faded away, and we ran to the house. I assume it was a person obscured by the darkness and holding a massive flashlight, but I don't know why they came after us or what they were planning to do. Deep in the woods, my hiking partner and I were many miles from any trail, path, or hint of human development when we came across a two-seater outhouse surrounded by dense overgrowth and trees. This outhouse was well maintained, painted, and supplied with toilet paper and magazines. Even the screens on the window vents were in excellent condition. The ground around it showed no signs of human activity. Yet there it was, miles from civilization and no paths or trails leading to it. As we sat there, not at the same time, putting it to good use, we wondered how whoever built it managed to get all the building materials, tools, and equipment to such a remote location surrounded by a thick canopy of trees and overgrowth, and why they would do it in the first place. I have two that I can't explain. The first one of mine was when I was driving home after work. It was after the sun had set, but you could still see the light coming from behind the mountains. I look over and see a perfect round orb hanging above the mountaintops. It was not the sun. I had no issues looking at it. It was like someone had put their finger in yellow paint and made a dot in the sky. It wasn't even giving off its own light. I'm watching this as I drive home. Turn a corner and look back. It's gone. I kick myself every time I think I should have pulled over to watch it. The second time, I was sitting on my back porch with one of my friends, just watching the sky, and off to our left, we saw the bright star that had been there the entire time we were outside start moving and drifting off into the black. I asked my friend, "Did you see that star drift off?" He said yes, and we have never talked about it since. This is the last from my sister. She was out camping with her boyfriend. She said they were lying down without a tent, and out of nowhere, the biggest moon she had ever seen popped out of nowhere. She turned to talk to her boyfriend, and he was already asleep. Then the next thing she remembers is watching the numbers on the clock in her car, which starts going faster and faster. After that, all she remembers is waking up outside the next day, and when she went to leave the campsite, the clock in her car wasn't the right time anymore. I used to work as a guard in an office building years ago. I remember a string of peculiar nights on the job. It was an oddly starless night, at least, as odd as starless can be when you're near a megawatt bright car lot casting humongous light pollution. I was in the lobby, starting my sweep, when I saw something across the street in the parking lot. It was just out of the corner of my eye, but I could swear I saw someone running, something skittering between the cars. I gazed out there for a long time, trying to see if anything was actually there. After a minute or so, I shrugged it off and continued with my sweep. Still a little rattled, I had my smoke on the roof to calm my nerves. Gazing off towards the horizon, I caught a glimpse of the same motion down in the car lot across the street. I looked down and saw what seemed to be a person, but it was all wrong. It was poised on all fours like the girls from Mama on the hood of a Ford Focus, looking up at me. Its entire body was like an outline, just black with only piercing, white, glowing eyes. I only saw it a moment before it flopped sideways off the hood and scrambled under the car. Needless to say, I hightailed my ass out into my car, speeding home as fast as I could. But the next shift was the real kicker. I'd had about 3 days off and plenty of alcohol and video games to suppress that experience when I went back to work. Everything was going on as normal when it came time for my sweep of the place. Walking across the lobby, I again saw skittering. But this time more. I whipped my head over and saw several of the black figures in the lot momentarily before they ran to hide again. Nearly shitting myself, I rapidly ran through each floor, dying to go home. My roof check came, and as I burst out onto the roof from the door, I saw even more of the things from across the street, but a few were crouched near my Pontiac in the office building parking lot. And this time, none of them looked away or ran. I spent the rest of the night in the guard shack and quit my job in the morning. Before I became too severely disabled, I'd take a 2-week solo camping trip out into the middle of the woods in WV. I had my cell phone on me, and I'd check in each day with some people, as I wasn't suicidal, but I really enjoyed the solitude. The last time I did this, I got a really uneasy feeling the first day. I just brushed it off as some anxiety due to being in a bit of pain. It just didn't let up, as I felt like someone was watching me. Someone watching me would have been really hard to do, too. I was about 5 miles, 8.05 kilometers, out from civilization, no one lived in the area, and the location was kind of unremarkable and didn't attract too many hikers. Finally, the anxiety just got too much. I was meditating, and my gut was screaming at me to get out of there. So I texted my sister, met her at the meeting place, walking backwards for a time, making sure I wasn't followed, etc., and got out of there. The next day, I read online that some hikers in the area went missing. They were later found dead about a month later, with very little decomposition. Supposedly, they looked like they were in agony. Where they were found is the spooky thing. They were about a half mile from where I was camping, slightly upriver. Plus, they never really found out who or what killed them or why they weren't eaten or really decomposed in the month that they were missing. I stopped camping in the area after that. I don't know if something was watching me or if something spooky went on, but I learned to appreciate my gut feelings after that. In college I lived with my grandparents. It was summer and my brother was visiting. We'd been out all day, swimming at a local pool with my cousins. I drove them home and my grandparents were there, visiting my aunt and uncle. We dropped my cousins off with the plan that we'd go back to the house to each get a shower and then come back over and figure out what we wanted to do that night. So, my brother and I are at the house. It is just us and the dogs. I live in the basement, which is like an apartment. We had already finished our showers. My brother was sitting at the bar in the little kitchen and I was just coming out of the bathroom when the dogs suddenly started barking. We then heard the upstairs door between the garage and the family room open and heard footsteps. So, the grandparents were home. My brother says he is going to run up to let them know we're taking off again. He runs up and then comes back down looking really confused. No one was there. There was no car in the garage. The dogs were snoozing on the furniture. We'd both heard the commotion. We heard the dogs, the door and people walking above. As we're standing there trying to figure out what is happening, it all happens again exactly as it just had. This time we both went upstairs and there was my grandma and grandpa. Everyone just laughed it off. Some speculated the dogs had been barking at something outside. But we specifically heard the door and footsteps. And my brother ran up pretty quickly the first time and the dogs were asleep, not looking outside. It was so weird. It happened a long time ago and it still bothers me if I sit and think about it too much. In 2010, I joined the Navy. In October of that year, following a 5-month of school, I was stationed in Norfolk, Virginia. That is where this happens. As an engineer, I had very little time off, so on a rare weekend that I had off, being my duty-free weekend and actually having all the work done for the day by 6 p.m., I was able to go home and not report back until Monday at 7 a.m. One of my friends was on duty that weekend, so I ended up hanging out with my friend John. It was close to midnight, and John and I were driving around Norfolk, just looking around, trying to find somewhere to sit and relax. We ended up finding a public rose garden with a memorial for veterans, an obelisk type thing, near the edge of it. When we were about 30 feet away from the memorial, I noticed a man in a pair of faded jeans, beat-up old cheap Reebok or Nike shoes, and a gray hoodie that was up around his head and tied. I also noticed that he was smoking. This struck me as odd because we had been walking in that direction for at least 2 or 3 minutes and had not noticed this man before. As I saw him, I stopped and nudged John. I whispered, "Do you see him, that man over there?" He nods at me, and we walk over to the man. We stood within inches of his feet where he was sitting. "Hey, how are you doing?" we ask. "I'm good. And you?" he responded. At this point, the man took a cigarette. Neither myself nor my friend were able to see a face, teeth, whites of the eyes, or hands. The lights at the memorial were on and bright. There was just darkness under his hood. We also saw no hands. It was as if a shadow were holding the cigarette. After our brief conversation, we walk away and sit under a tree. The tree was maybe 30 feet away, and by the time we had sat down, the man, the figure, was no longer there. We did not notice him get up, we heard no sound of footsteps, and there was also no one walking around. In the minute that it took us to get to the tree, he had vanished into thin air. About 2 days later, when I was on watch so I could get it signed off so I could stand watch alone, I told this story to my shipmate. He stopped in tracks and asked, what color hoodie was he wearing? I told him, "Did you see a face?" I shook my head. I asked him if he had seen the same thing I had. And he told me no, not in person, but a friend of his had taken a picture where the exact figure I had described was walking past the lens. I asked him if he knew what the figure was, and he said something about him being a seeker, that he was looking for someone or something. I still have this fear that one night I'm going to wake up and find this seeker standing beside my bed. I've seen a lot of strange things, but one in particular sticks in my mind. Driving late at night after a school event. I'm taking a few friends home who don't have cars or rides home. We're winding through a narrow side street that cuts from one end of a neighborhood to the next one over. It runs uphill. To my left is a large hill, and to my right are side streets that lead downhill to more houses. A teenager comes screaming out of one of the side streets as if the hounds of hell are chasing after him. He runs in front of my car. I slam on my brakes just as he enters the light of my headlights. He looks at me, completely terrified, leaning on the hood of my car. My friends all finally realize why we've stopped and start asking who this guy is. We all start to open the doors to ask him if he's okay. He takes off, running towards the hill, before we can get out. He disappeared before he could pass through the other headlight. We freak out and go searching the hill to see if he went up that way. But it's almost straight up and super high. There's no way we missed him. We were looking right at him. I never could figure that one out. I'd seen other strange things in that same area over the years. When I was growing up, we had a house with a big front yard, no trees, but a lot of space. My bedroom had a big window facing the yard. Me and my two brothers would play in the bedroom a lot. One day I was melting my plastic toys against a lamplight bulb, as you do, and I looked out the window. It was mid-evening, so not pitch black but not bright, to clear the spots from my eyes after staring at the light bulb. When the spots cleared, there was a man standing in front of my window with a mask. It was not like a ski mask or anything like that. It was shaped like a fox's face. I blink a lot, and he keeps looking in at us. I don't know what to do, so I just silently pointed him out the window. My brothers didn't clue in immediately, and before they turned around, he slowly sank to the ground, so we couldn't see him through the window anymore. I walked to the window and looked below, but he had crawled off somewhere. I decided I probably imagined it. I never told my parents, and nothing ever came of it, as far as I know, but sleeping in that room was weird for a while. This has a definite explanation, but it is still weird and scary. For a while, I was getting into nighttime photography, like taking landscape photos with the starry sky. There's a highway in Washington that leads to a really cool observatory on Mount St. Helens. So one November night, I drove out there at like 10 p.m., walked around, and took pictures until about 2 a.m. Leaving the observatory, you drive down this winding hill that eventually takes you back to the state highway. It's dark, I'm tired, and I start driving down the hill. I found a corner, and there's a bull elk standing in the middle of the road, staring at my car. I'm going slow enough, so I stop with plenty of distance between myself and the elk. As it's staring at me, its family crosses the road behind it. So okay, he's just protecting his family from traffic. He makes his way to the shoulder of the road and appears to start walking away. I start driving again, but this time really slowly, because seeing him startled me, and now I'm tired, alert, and out in the woods. I pass the elk and bring my speed up to about 25, both hands on the wheel, brights on, window rolled down. All of a sudden, this elk is side by side with my car, keeping pace and chasing me. It freaked me out, so I sped up a little bit, and it still kept up. It chased me all the way down the hill, which seemed like a mile, but maybe a little shorter, and then he finally peeled off and disappeared. My best explanation is that maybe my car was threatening its family, and so he had to be a tough guy and chase me away. But the initial panic of seeing him in my headlights, then calming down, and then being blindsided by him chasing my car was enough to give me the jitters for my entire 2-hour drive home. When I was 12, I had just come home from school, and as usual, I was the only person in the house, siblings at friends or after-school programs, parents at work. Anyway, I walked into my kitchen to grab a snack, and I immediately felt this weird sensation that I'd never felt before. I got really sick to my stomach and made my way to the dining area, where I just collapsed onto a chair. I sat there with my head hanging down when it just hit me how silent it was. I lifted my head and gazed at the room for a bit. After about 20 seconds or so of just pure tense silence and nothingness, I relaxed a bit when, out of nowhere, this loud noise came from directly beneath my chair. It literally sounded like paper was being crumbled. I leapt out of my chair, and as soon as I did, I just heard what sounded like a little girl giggle, followed by these soft but loud footsteps running down the hallway away from the kitchen towards the front of the house. I slowly backed into the wall behind me without taking my eyes off the door leading to the hallway, and then proceeded to make my way to the back door. Once I reached it, I bolted out of there and ran to my friend's house, which was only 3 houses down from me. I called my mom at work, and she told me to just stay put. That is still the most unexplainable thing to ever happen to me. I used to work for the United States government, assisting farms and farm workers around the country. I often worked in very remote areas of the country and had some strange encounters. There is one, however, that really stands out. The first one occurred while I was working in the southeastern United States. A coworker and I were winding our way through the Appalachian Mountains, checking in on various tobacco and tomato farms deep in the mountains. While trying to find our way to an especially remote farm, we turned down the wrong dirt road and got lost. We were miles from the nearest city, and we found ourselves surrounded by a dense forest and mountains towering above us, blocking any cell service. We tried to turn around, but the road was too narrow. We had to keep driving until the road widened a bit more and we could turn the car around. After a few minutes of driving into the woods, we stumbled upon a clearing wide enough to let us turn the car around. As we approached, we noticed the ruins of an old house in the middle of the clearing. The house had burned down and looked like it could barely stand. The ground around the house was still charred from the fire, but the surrounding trees and forest were fine. We parked the car on the edge of the clearing and got out to have a closer look. As we approached, my coworker and I stopped simultaneously in our tracks. We both realized at that moment that the ground around the house had been burned in a perfect circle, with the house in the exact center. Something didn't feel right. My coworker and I looked at each other as if we were looking for the other person to acknowledge how strange the situation was, but we kept walking towards the house. The moment we stepped foot into the burned circle, all of the ambient noise of the forest stopped and went dead silent. All the bugs, the birds chirping, the wind whipping through the trees, the sound of the grass swaying back and forth, all of it stopped. It was as if someone had secretly slipped noise-canceling headphones onto my coworker and me. We again stopped walking to check to see if we were hearing things right, and that's when the noise began. It was a booming, rumbling noise echoing in the sky. It sounded like the loudest, deepest trumpet you could ever hear. It was so loud that it hurt our ears. I could feel the noise rattling in my eardrums. It was constant. It didn't change the pitch. It didn't stop or take a break. A cold chill ran down my spine, and every part of me felt like something was very, very wrong. We looked at the sky and looked around to try to see what could be making the noise, but there was nothing. There were no clouds in the sky, and we were all alone. Meanwhile, the noise kept going, and the feeling that something was wrong only grew stronger. My coworker and I both turned around and ran back to our car as fast as we could. The moment we stepped outside of the burned circle on the ground, the booming noise stopped, and the normal sounds of the forest returned. We could hear the birds again. We could hear the wind and the leaves on the trees. We jumped into the car and drove out of the woods in silence. We didn't turn the radio on or say a word until we returned to our hotel. When we parked, my coworker just looked at me and asked, "That happened, right?" To this day, I can't explain that house, what the noise we heard was, or why we could only hear it when we stepped into the circle. A while back, I was trail riding on my mountain bike. Totally familiar terrain. I don't live in a place where there's any predators to worry about. It was a gorgeous day, and I came to a point where the trail forked. Left was into trees, right was through the fields, and I came to a complete stop. Not because I was pausing to choose my route, but because I froze. Spine tingling, hairs standing up, senses on overdrive. There were no smells in the air, no unusual sounds to be heard, and nothing to see. There was only dread. Every fiber of my being told me to get out, and I did. As fast as I could, back the way I came. No looking back. I don't know what was in the woods that day, and I haven't been back since. Duck that shit. At least 5 times in my life, I have seen a little gnome or something dart from one side of the room and go under my dresser. I always saw him out of the corner of my eye, but I have excellent peripheral vision. I've even seen him go around corners to get to my room or dresser. He never had features, he was just a solid shadow, if that makes any sense. He was maybe 6 to 8 tall. I was never afraid of him either, he didn't give off an ominous presence. And he was so fast. But not lightning fast. I could always see him running. I would tell my mom about him, and she sort of believed me because she believes in ghosts and stuff, but I don't think she took me seriously. One day when I came home from school, she told me she saw the strangest thing. She saw a little shadow man dart across the hall and go under my dresser. This was about a year or 2 after I had seen him most recently, and I don't think she was making fun of me or anything. This happened from about the time I was 12 to 17. I haven't seen him in the last 12 years or so, and a few years ago I got rid of the dresser by destroying it for firewood. It was old and solid wood. My theory for some time was that maybe he was a boggart or something, but he wasn't mischievous, so I don't think that's what he was. I assume he had a portal under the dresser. I feel bad if I destroy his home, but since I haven't seen him in a while, I don't know if he is even still there. I was 16 and sharing a pull-out bed with my 12-year-old cousin at our beach house. I'd never had a paranormal experience here before this. I woke up around 2 a.m., and my cousin was sitting straight up, staring at the floor next to the bed, wide-eyed. I asked if she was okay with no response, and when I followed her eyes, I saw what I can only describe as an elf-sized, maybe 2 feet, shadow figure move from right next to her to the other side of the room. It was 3D until it got to the wall and then turned into a 2D shadow and went around the corner into my parents' bedroom. I followed it, and it was nowhere to be seen. My cousin was still staring wide-eyed, her jaw dropped. I shook her, and she woke up and was a bit confused, but I asked her if she just saw that, and she explained exactly what I saw too. She said she couldn't move or make noise. I immediately thought of sleep paralysis because I've had it before and that was exactly what it was like, but if so, why could I see her sleep paralysis? Anyways, we make jokes about the elf in the beach house to this day, but deep down, I think it still freaks both of us out a little. I was 4 and bored. With a sigh, I looked out of my window and saw a typical dark brown shepherd mix trotting along the narrow sidewalk. I watched with curiosity as he drew closer and stopped right in front of me. This beast noticed me watching him even though I never made a sound. The silent showdown lasted for a few seconds but felt unnerving, to say the least. The stray then proceeded to look both ways down the street before crossing it and was gone, or so I thought. Later that night, I was awoken by a low growling noise that was coming from the beanbag next to my bed. Stricken with paralyzing fear, I saw the same dog lying on it. I tried my best to wake my sleeping cousin next to me, but I couldn't. Feeling as though I was going to be attacked at any moment, I screamed and ran to my mom's room. She didn't believe me and sent me back to bed. It was just a bad dream, she said. I know what I heard and saw that night, and it was 100% not a dream. In March 2011, I took a late-night drive with 3 high school friends. We drove from Modesto, where we all lived, to Knights Ferry, about 27 miles east. Knights Ferry is a tiny little village in the foothills where the Central Valley meets the Sierra Nevadas. We arrived around 11 p.m. and found the place eerily desolate. The purpose of the outing was just for the drive itself, so we weren't surprised, but we did get sort of creeped out. It's cliché, but the place was a total ghost town. There aren't even street lights, so there are just dark, shut-up buildings along Main Street, but a full moon was shining overhead and illuminated everything. We parked at the end of Main Street, near an abandoned mill from the 19th century. The driver friend, F, and I decided to get out there and get a better view of the open sky and take in the quiet night. Our other 2 friends, J and K, stayed in the car. They were freaked out by the quiet, dark, isolated setting. The road is a bit elevated above the mill and the adjacent recreation area along the Stanislaus River. F and I walked to the edge of the road. When we reached the waist-high wooden guardrail, we saw 2 figures standing below, probably 30 to 40 feet away, near the mill building. These figures were featureless and solid gray. It was as if they were wearing those skin-tight colored bodysuits that they sell at costume stores. They had no faces, no identifiable marks, appeared to have no clothes on, no genitalia or breasts, no hair, nothing. Just a head, torso, arms, and legs, and about the size of an average adult human. And I can't attribute their lack of features to darkness because the moon was brightly shining down on them. They were completely exposed in the clearing with no shadows obscuring them. We could see them plain as day, and they almost seemed like they were slightly glowing. I don't know if that was just an illusion from their light color reflecting moonlight or if my eyes were playing tricks on me. But just as we laid eyes on them, they turned towards us, like they had been in conversation, but then noticed our presence the same way we had noticed them. Even though they had no eyes or faces, we could tell they were looking at us. We looked back at them for what was probably less than 4 seconds before F and I looked at each other in horror and both instinctively turned and ran back to the car. We jumped in and peeled out of there, scaring J and K in the process. From their position in the car, they were unable to see the figures. F and I recalled to them what we had seen as we sped out of town and had identical descriptions. We both saw the same physical characteristics, movements, and strange glow. We debated back and forth for a long time, trying to rationalize what they were, but could never feel totally convinced by any of the conclusions. When I was around 8 or 9 years old, me and my whole family would go camping, and my dad used to dig a pit in the ground with some hot coals, and we would cook steaks, potatoes, carrots, etc. He would actually cover it up with dirt and just let it cook. They were wrapped in tin foil. Anyways, I had dozed off in a tent waiting for dinner to be ready, and my parents were playing cards at a picnic table with some other friends of theirs who had joined us. Suddenly our dog starts barking and going crazy, but my parents were kind of drunk, and the music they were playing was really loud. So I poked my head out to tell him to shut up, and I swear there was a solid black, 4-legged shadow mass trying to dig up the food in the pit. It was kind of like a shadow person, but it looked like maybe a dog or mountain cat. It was about 10 feet from me, so I know it wasn't an actual animal. It's hard to describe. So I screamed at my dad, and when he got up, the thing just vanished. It didn't run off, it disappeared. My dog was howling and scared out of his mind. There were claw marks on the ground where it had dug into the pit trying to get the food, but my dad blamed our dog, got mad at me, and asked why I didn't stop him. He went back to playing cards, and my dog came into the tent with me. We both heard a long, low, deep growl coming from under the ground right beneath our tent. I prayed to Jesus to keep me and my dog safe, and from then on, nothing bad happened. The next morning, I told my older brother what happened, and he just laughed and called me a liar. Anyway, yeah, only me and my dog saw the thing, whatever it was. I have quite a few. I took a walk with my brother when I was 11, and we were out by a small waterfall. We found burned candles on each side of a clump of some kind of animal hair and bone. It was not totally creepy, but it was weird, considering our hiking spot was very well hidden from the world. Once, as I was walking alone in the woods, I was on a trail. I saw something about 200 feet in front of me. It was tall, skinny, and black at the end of the trail. It was starting to get dark out, and I figured it was a tree. I picked up a stick and threw it at it, just to make sure I wasn't actually dealing with a creepy beast. Whatever this thing was, it turned towards me. I froze and then took off as fast as I could. I stopped to catch my breath and looked back. There was nothing there. I have no idea what it was. Also, things like hearing unexplained screams or finding mutilated animal carcasses are always creepy. My dad went hunting one morning, and he walked about 2 hours up a semi-remote mountainside, and since it was dark the morning he went, he didn't pay much attention. But around 12 p.m., he began walking out, and he walked up on 3 crosses made from old branches and vines, like something from the Blair Witch Project. The 2 on each side were about 6 feet tall, and the middle one was 8 feet tall. He said that as big as they were, they had to be pretty deep into the ground, so he had to be a group of people. There were also a few smaller ones down below these. He took a picture, but he got so creeped out that he went straight to his car and came home. This was back in October, and we've yet to determine what it could be or why someone would put that much effort into something people wouldn't be able to see. We live in Virginia, and he says he could find it again if he went there, but he is set on never going back to that spot because he just got an incredible bad feeling from being there. When I was 13, my uncle went out of town and asked me to stay at his place to keep an eye on it. I invited my buddy to come spend the weekend with me, so I wasn't alone. We were hanging out in the attached garage watching TV around 1 a.m. when I realized I forgot to turn off the pool pump. When we opened the garage door to the backyard, we were flooded with this overwhelming smell of burning meat. Right when I smelled it, I was overcome with a feeling of dread, and my gut told me not to go outside, so we immediately closed the door. As we closed the garage door, my uncle's dog started barking and growling at the other door, which was open and led into the house. She was barking or growling into the darkness of the hallway. As we slammed that door shut, the electric dartboard went haywire. It was making all sorts of crazy noises and flashing all of the lights like the entire thing was short-circuiting. Then, out of nowhere, everything just stopped, the feeling of dread went away, the dog stopped barking at the door, and the dartboard shut off. We did not sleep at all that night, and thankfully, my uncle came home the next day. I'm not really sure how to rationalize all 3 of those things happening at the same time. One of my best friends in high school and I used to drive to all the haunted spots we could find in our state. Sometimes we'd get other people to come, and sometimes we'd be alone. Creepy stuff happened a lot, but it was usually us just being on edge, and most could be explained away. One thing happened, though, that I will never forget, and I can never find a logical reason for it. One night, she and I were alone playing our little game, but this time we stuck to our own town. We were heading to a bridge that is known for creepy stuff happening, and we were passing through a neighborhood we had both been in a million times before. It was a quiet and darker neighborhood filled with only houses. She turned on a street again that I had been on before, and there was a gravel road into the woods in front of us. I said something like, "What the hell, I don't remember this." And she was dead silent, driving onto the gravel and into the trees. We were driving, and there were turns and curves, but this gravel road and trees were all that were around. I kept saying I was confused, this wasn't supposed to be where we were, and my friend was agreeing. We had been in this area countless times, and there were no woods or gravel roads. I felt so uneasy. She gave me her phone and told me to pull up Google Maps and see where it said we were. It wouldn't pin our location, and I was pretty much all but crying and hyperventilating at this point. We drove for a while and couldn't find any roads leading out or where we came from. Finally, after forever, we got out of it, and she just kind of silently took me home. The next day, we decided to go find it again. We took the exact same roads, and there was nothing there. The neighborhood was normal. If I were alone, I would have chalked it up to falling asleep or losing my damn mind, but we were both together, and the exact same thing happened. Whenever I tell people about it, I'm not sure they believe me, but it still gives me goosebumps. Nothing overtly scary happened while in these woods, but they weren't supposed to be there. I had a Ouija board a while back that we got rid of due to spooky activity. It's been over a year, and though we've had stuff happen, none of it was associated with that sense of foreboding until last week with the bed and one other incident. I don't know if it was the same thing or not, but it was very unsettling. The other incident involved my car. It always stays unlocked at home because we live pretty deep in the woods with 2 guard dogs, and I don't keep anything valuable in there anyway. As such, my alarm is never armed. While I was home alone, the alarm started going off. I thought I must have tripped it on accident, like my keys were in my pocket or something. But my keys were on the nightstand. I went to the window to look out, thinking I must have locked it and forgotten, and maybe the dog had bumped it. I could see the lights on my car flashing, but both dogs were far away, only just coming out of my boyfriend's parents' garage, on the other side of the driveway and up a hill, to stare at my car. When I noticed they weren't close by, my alarm stopped on its own. It's not a big deal. But then I heard the door leading into our garage slam shut. Unnerved, I called my boyfriend to ask if he had come home and was downstairs in the garage. He wasn't, and no one else was home. I was sure someone was downstairs. I called the cops, but a search turned up nothing. There was no sign that anyone had been there. The weirdest part is that my car, as it turns out, was unlocked. So even if someone had been trying to break in and had managed to get away, there is no reason why the alarm should have gone off. Also, I distinctly heard that downstairs door close. There is no other way out of there except into our house or out that same door. I listened hard while waiting for the cops, but that door did not open or close again. A few years ago, I was living in Germany. My family is American. Our home was concrete with earth insulation. No central air, but radiators throughout. 4 total levels. Our kids' rooms were up top, with their own playroom. We felt they would have more space and could have more fun here. My husband and I were on the floor below, and we basically didn't use the other rooms except for storing his work gear. So my mom is visiting in the summer, the last half of July. Lots of fans and open windows, but my mom was freezing at night because she is from Florida, and it was much cooler at night. She told me she turned off the fans and closed the windows. Prior to her being up there with the kids had come down to my room almost every single night since we moved in, about 6 months earlier, because it was scary up there. But they were happy to stay up there with Grandma. Before she left, she told me she had prayed in the room to remove anything evil. I was just like, okay, whatever. But then she said, well, I didn't want to freak you out, but I think there was a presence. She is a believer in many things. Then she described a loud, hot breath moving from bed to bed and sitting down, sort of a feeling of heaviness on the bed next to you. She said each girl was bothered in her sleep, sort of moving around like they were starting to wake up. She waited and pretended to be asleep, and it also came to her bed, and she could hear it breathing almost like a growl several times before moving away again. After she left, my kids seemed to be fine sleeping up there alone. They only came down once or twice before we moved out when our lease was up. I don't think my mom is a liar. But something definitely changed after her visit. I used to live next to a small graveyard in Moorhead, Kentucky. About 7 miles from town. Middle of nowhere type stuff. 11,605 Cranston Road, Moorhead, Kentucky. I've experienced a lot of shit there, but the experience that changed me was this. I was outside a little over midnight listening to music and just having a good time. I stopped to look around at the sky and appreciate what was around me when I looked across the field, probably almost a little under an acre, at the neighbor's house across the way because I saw movement. So I said to myself, why is our neighbor out so late with a flashlight? And before I could finish that thought, the bulb of light I assumed was a flashlight flew in my direction across our field and landed on my arm, then disappeared. It legit looked like a flashlight, but when it flew towards me in half a second and made my arm numb, then disappeared, I froze. 15 seconds later, I ran inside, sat on the couch next to my mom, and didn't say anything about it until the next day. One day I went outside and had a strange feeling of anxiety and fear. It felt as if someone was watching me. Since it was night, I decided to go back inside and go to sleep, calming down. A week or 3 days later, I invited both of my girlfriends to my house. We ate pizza in the daytime and talked. When it started to get slightly dark, we went inside and talked some more. I had to go back outside again since my pet bird was in the shed. I had the same eerie feeling. I told my girlfriends to come with me, and they did. Supposedly, I wasn't crazy, but I noticed they started getting nervous and told me they were afraid. I put a salt circle around my pet bird with rainwater drops and rosemary. Then we went back inside. It wasn't the first time that happened to me, because I'm guessing my house is haunted due to the common activity. At some point a year later, I was trying to sleep but saw a black figure just staring at me through the mirror. At the time, I was starting to think that I'd been hallucinating and didn't care about it. It was hovering above me, then disappeared once I blinked. That night, I had a nightmare of creatures shifting into people I knew in real life, manipulating their voice and everything. Eventually, I woke up in a panic, but I couldn't move. I knew I was having a scene of sleep paralysis. I couldn't move and felt some weight on my back. I was frozen for at least 30 seconds. I still don't know how to explain how that happened. That happened a few days ago. Either I'm crazy or my house is haunted, there is no in between. When I was about 6 or 5, I was brought into a hospital due to a serious infection and a large cut on my knee. Since I wasn't able to walk without taking a 30-minute break every 10 minutes, I was mostly in the room I was given. Back then, I didn't really have a good relationship with my sister, so she barely stayed in my room. This was eventually where the problem started. On about my third night of my hospitalized stay, I started experiencing extreme paranoia every time I was the only one in the room. For some reason, I always thought someone was just staring at me from the bathroom door frame. It was the 6th night that had confirmed my fears. My sister had been watching me when my mom was at work for a few hours. Since it was her fault I even got the infection, I didn't talk to her and just went to sleep. When I woke up, the TV was off, the only lights were the buttons near and on my bed, and my sister was gone. I couldn't really see in the dark, but I could see a silhouette in the doorway of the bathroom. I knew it wasn't sleep paralysis because I could move just fine, so being prone to freezing up when scared, I didn't move. The silhouette was shaped in the form of a tall figure, and I could barely make out anything else. For what felt like hours, that thing just stood there, and after a while, I tried to ignore it and go back to sleep, but I could just feel it staring at me. I tried everything, talking to it, squeezing my eyes shut, calling for one of the nurses or even my sister, and much more. I ended up having to spend the whole night with it staring at me, not being able to sleep or anything. When it finally was morning, I tried to tell everyone about it, and nobody believed me, saying it was just a kid's imagination. Even years later, I think about it from time to time and get scared over shadows shaped like what I saw years ago. I have experienced many things in my life, and many of them are, to me, unexplainable. I am a light sleeper, so if there is some unexplained noise or something else happens in my room, I wake up instantly. Especially after these things happen to me. I have to be alert and be able to defend myself. The woman. Throughout my life, I have been haunted and terrorized by this woman. At first, she looks like a normal woman, but she can turn her face into this demon-like thing, so I don't think she's a normal woman. The front door of my house makes this distinct noise when it is open and closed. You can feel and hear its thunder through the whole house. Also, every time there is a key in the front door on the inside, you can't insert a key on the other side because the key blocks it, so this means that a person cannot enter the house if the key is on the inside. This is significant because I personally locked the door that night, and there was no one in the house but me. So no one owning a key could enter the house, and there was, afterwards, no sign of forced entry. The reason why I know that I locked it myself is because I checked 3 separate times, one time when I was eating that night, and one time, about an hour later, when I went to the bathroom, which was like 1.5 meters from this door. And one time before I went to bed. Also, the stairs to the first floor of my house make a distinct cracking sound when someone is coming up. This night was normal, my parents were away, and I felt sleepy, so I called it a day and went to sleep. I was lying in bed when all of a sudden the front door was opened, which I heard clearly. There is also a second door between the living room and the front door, this one also makes a distinct sound when heard. After the front door was opened, I heard this door being opened and then someone coming up the stairs in a slow, slightly creepy way. I thought it was someone who actually belonged to this house, like my mother or father. Then my door was opened, which was creepy but not unusual since my room has a bunch of closets in which my mother stores her linens, bedspreads, and stuff. It's not unusual for them to creep into my room and grab a bunch of sheets and whatnot. But I felt something was wrong and expected the door to close soon as the sheet grabbers do not stay in my room for long after grabbing sheets. That's when I heard something walk up to my bed and stand in front of it. I peeked and saw this woman standing next to my bed, watching me. I kept quiet because I feared some kind of torment. That was when this thing lied down in bed next to me. It didn't do anything sexual or succubus-like, but it grabbed my left and right hands. I made sure I did not move them, but I did not pin them down. All of a sudden, something started touching my face, something going through various areas on my face and even in my nose. Yeah, that's right. That was when I realized that it was not touching me with its left or right hand, because I started thinking, there is something holding my right hand and something holding my left hand. What in heaven's name is toughening my face? I peeked a little bit with my eyes and saw her eyes being all white except for small black pupils, like reptilian-like eyes. And I saw a long reptilian-like tongue, that was touching my face. This thing, that looked like a woman, directed its tongue at my mouth, entering my mouth and moving it around. I suddenly felt life and happiness being sucked out of me. That's when I said to myself, I'm going to count to 3 and bite this witch tongue real hard. I bit her tongue harder than ever, and this thing started to scream. This thing wanted to grab my throat like it has done before in my life, before I pushed her out of my bed and down on the floor. This thing stood up, and I tried to fly kick her, but when my feet touched her, it was like I kicked a stone statue. I fell on my bed while my feet hurt, and this thing lifted me up without touching me and threw me against the wall that was behind me. I tried to distract her by playing some music from my Mac using the remote function on my iPhone, but she opened my laptop and uttered some words, and some kind of mist left her mouth on my laptop. Ducking weird, I grabbed a pair of scissors and pointed them at her. She then looked at the scissors and at me in an angry but kind of asking way, like, what are you going to do with that, boy? If you dare to point that thing at me, I will screw you up big time. Keep that thing away. Then this thing grabbed my throat and held me up. This thing sucked happiness, a misty kind of thing, out of my body, and I could see it leave my body in a mist-like way. Sorry if my description is vague or strange, but I have no logic for explaining this. That's when this thing suddenly turned its head away, and her face became normal. Then she just walked out of my room, down the stairs. I quickly ran after her when she fell from the last few stairs. I was able to chase her down just as she was leaving the house, with the front door key still in place. I could reach the front door just as she closed it, for like half a second. Somehow I needed to unlock the front door without the lock making a horrible noise of being locked, as she could have done. How could she lock the door from the outside without being able to insert the key from the other side, half a second before she opened the door and closed it behind her, but not locking it? That's when I went outside, after having to unlock the door, just in time to see her getting into a car, yes, a car, and driving off in an aggressive way. I know what you guys think. Why does an entity like that need a car? I have no ducking clue, but this SHT happened to me. I thought about calling the police, but what could I say? Some demon grabbed my throat, and I want you to arrest it. They don't believe in demons and shit like that, do they?